Weston Hale had tested 19 women in 14 months, and every single one of them had failed. 19 dinners where his card mysteriously declined. 19 nights in a coat from the thrift store on Colfax Avenue. 19 times he watched a woman's face change the moment she thought he had nothing left to offer her. After Ashley walked out of their marriage and took half of everything he had built, Weston made himself a promise. He would never again let someone love him for his money, because he wasn't sure anyone ever had. So he kept the lie running. He drove a rusted Ford pickup instead of the car parked in his private garage. He wore flannel shirts that had seen better decades. He told every date the same story, that he worked in software support, that he rented a one-bedroom apartment near the light rail. That money was always a little tight. Most women lasted one date. A few made it to two before an excuse arrived like clockwork. Then, on a gray Tuesday in December, he walked into a diner on the edge of Lakewood, Colorado, and everything he thought he understood about people started to come apart. Her name was Piper Lindqvist, and she was refilling an old man's coffee when Weston first saw her through the frosted window. She was 26 years old, working double shifts to keep her younger sister alive after an accident that had taken their parents and left Sadie unable to walk. Piper had no idea who Weston really was. She had no reason to expect that the quiet man in the corner booth would change the entire shape of her life, and she had every reason to walk away from him the moment she learned the truth. Before this story goes any further, if you're watching this from somewhere cold tonight, tell us where in the comments, because we love knowing how far these stories travel. And if a tale about kindness finding its way home is the kind of thing you needed today, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video so more stories like it find you. Now let's get back to Weston and Piper, because what happens next is going to surprise you. Dear friends, winter has always felt like honesty to me, the way snow strips a street down to something quiet and true before anyone has walked through it. I wrote this story thinking about the version of ourselves we hide under old coats and harder winters, and how sometimes it takes someone else's warmth to remember we were never as cold as we pretended to be. I hope Weston and Piper's story warms something in you tonight. Weston had walked out on his 19th date 3 weeks earlier, a woman who ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu and then discovered a sudden family emergency the second his card was declined. He drove home that night with his hands tied on the wheel, furious at himself for still hoping, furious at every version of himself that kept setting the same trap and getting the same result. His ex-wife had been right about one thing, at least. Everyone had a price, and he was exhausted from paying to find out what it was. The diner sat on a corner that most people drove past without noticing, a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign and windows fogged from the cold pressing against the glass. Weston almost kept driving that afternoon. Then he saw her, a young woman with light brown hair pulled back in a loose braid, crouching beside an elderly man's table because his hand had started shaking too badly to lift his mug. She didn't sigh. She didn't glance at the clock. She just steadied the cup for him and smiled like she had nowhere else in the world she needed to be. He parked without deciding to. Inside, the diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, and the booths were patched with silver tape in places. He sat near the window and ordered black coffee, and he watched her move through the room with a kind of patience he hadn't seen in longer than he could remember, not from employees, not from women he dated, not even from himself. He came back the next afternoon. Then the one after that. On his fourth visit, she finally walked over with the pot in her hand and a look of amused suspicion on her face. "You've ordered the same thing 4 days running and you never seem to leave," she said, tilting her head. "Either you really love bad coffee or you're working up the nerve to tell me something." Weston felt heat crawl up the back of his neck before he could stop it. "Is it that obvious?" he asked. "A little," she said, and topped off a mug that was still half full. "Her name tag," said Piper, and up close her eyes were a pale, tired blue, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from one bad night. "So what is it?" she asked, leaning one hip against the booth. "You selling something? Because fair warning, I've got about $4 to my name until Friday." "No, nothing like that," Weston said, and the words came out faster than he intended. "I just wanted to ask if maybe you'd want to get a coffee sometime, somewhere that isn't your job." Piper studied him for a long moment, the same way a person checks the sky before deciding whether to bring an umbrella. He was dressed in an old flannel jacket he'd bought secondhand specifically for this, jeans gone soft at the knees, boots that had been resoled twice. His actual watch, the one worth more than her car, sat locked in a drawer at home along with the wedding ring he'd finally stopped wearing. I work about 70 hours a week between here and the grocery store, she said carefully. I've got a 16-year-old sister who needs me most nights. I don't really have room in my life for dating. Just coffee. Then, Weston said, 30 minutes, your choice of when and where. Piper bit the inside of her cheek, considering, and Weston noticed the raw patch on her knuckle from dishwater, the uniform gone thin from too many washes. Okay, she said finally. Thursday, there's a park 2 blocks over. Bring your own coffee, though. I'm off the clock, and I'm not making it for free. On Thursday afternoon, Weston sat on a park bench holding 2 paper cups of gas station coffee, feeling more nervous than he had at any board meeting in years. Snow had started drifting down in slow, lazy flakes, catching in the bare branches above him, and he told himself this was just another test, another way to confirm what he already believed about people. Then Piper walked up in jeans and a sweater mended at both elbows, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time, and Weston felt his rehearsed detachment slipping before she'd even sat down. Sorry I'm late, she said, a little breathless, sitting down and leaving a careful foot of space between them. Sadie had physical therapy, and it ran long. My sister, she added, taking the coffee he offered. She was in the car when our parents died 3 years ago. She hasn't walked since. Piper said it plainly, the way someone reports the weather, no plea in her voice, no invitation for pity. That must be incredibly hard, Weston said, meaning it. It is what it is, Piper said, and took a sip of the coffee before making a face. God, this is terrible. Why did I suggest we bring our own? Weston laughed, surprised by how quickly she could shift a mood from heavy to light. I thought it was pretty bad too, but I didn't want to insult your choice, he said. I work in a diner, Piper said, deadpan. I have zero excuse for recommending bad coffee. She smiled then, and Weston felt his resolve loosen another notch, the careful distance he kept from people thinning out without his permission. So what's your story? She asked. What do you do when you're not haunting my section 4 days in a row? He had rehearsed this part after 19 practice runs, and the lie came easily. Tech support, he said. Small apartment across town. I've got an 8-year-old daughter, Ren, joint custody with my ex-wife. That must be hard too, Piper said, echoing his words back at him gently. The custody part. Weston looked down at his coffee, because this was usually where he deflected, where he kept the conversation skating along the surface. Something about the plainness of Piper's own grief made him want to tell the truth, or as much truth as he could afford. My ex-wife left for someone with more money and more status, more of whatever it was I apparently wasn't giving her, he said. It taught me that people leave when things get difficult or when somebody better comes along. Piper was quiet for a moment, watching the kids on the swing set across the path. I'm sorry that happened to you, she said. It's fine, it was 2 years ago. That doesn't mean it stopped hurting, she said simply, and Weston looked up, caught off guard by how easily she'd said the thing nobody else had bothered to say to him. They sat there for almost 2 hours, drinking coffee that never got better, watching a few kids chase each other around a swing set across the path. Piper told him about Sadie's small victories, how she'd managed to lift a paintbrush on her own that week, how her physical therapist thought a new brace might help with balance. Weston told her about Ren's obsession with the solar system, how she made him lie on the living room floor pointing at glow in the dark stars stuck to the ceiling. He didn't mention that the ceiling belonged to a penthouse 14 feet high, or that Ren's school cost more each semester than most people's yearly salary. When Piper finally checked her phone and swore under her breath, she stood too fast, slinging her bag over one shoulder. She had to get to her evening shift at the grocery store. Can I see you again? Weston asked, and the question came out more urgent than he meant it to. Piper hesitated, and for a second, he was sure she'd say no. I don't know if that's smart, she admitted. I can't afford to date anyone right now. Not really. Every dollar I make goes to Sadie's therapy or keeping the lights on. And you seem decent, so I don't want to waste your time. This was exactly the setup he needed. A woman with nothing to gain and every reason to walk away. The perfect final test of whether anyone could care about him without his money attached. But what came out of his mouth surprised him. What if we just do this, then, he said. Parks, bad coffee, talking. I'm not exactly rolling in cash either. Piper studied his face like she was looking for the catch. "Okay," she said finally. "Yeah, let's do this again." As he watched her walk toward her second job of the day, he told himself it was still just an experiment. He almost believed it. Their second date happened at a small Italian place Weston chose deliberately, nice enough that the bill would matter to someone counting every dollar, exactly nice enough to make the test count. Piper showed up 10 minutes late in a thrifted blue dress, apologizing, saying Sadie had a rough afternoon and it took longer than expected to get her settled. "Is she okay?" Weston asked, and was startled to realize he actually wanted the answer. "Just one of those days where her body doesn't cooperate," Piper said. "She gets frustrated. Her nurse is with her now, so we're fine." They ordered, and Piper chose the cheapest pasta on the menu despite his encouragement to get whatever she wanted, and the conversation fell easy again despite the terrible lighting and the paper napkins. She told him about a customer who left her a $50 tip that morning, how she'd nearly cried in the walk-in cooler because it meant she could finally buy Sadie the tablet her physical therapist had recommended for the exercises. Weston could have bought 1,000 tablets without blinking. Instead, he said, "That's wonderful. She's lucky to have you," and meant every word of it. When the check arrived, Weston executed the plan he'd run 19 times before. He patted his jacket, checked his wallet, let his face fall into practiced embarrassment. "I swear I grabbed my card this morning," he said. "I must have left it on the counter. I'm so sorry." "Hey, it's fine," Piper said immediately, already reaching into her purse. "Happens to me constantly." She pulled out 2 folded 20s, tip money still warm from her apron pocket, and paid the check without a flicker of hesitation or disappointment crossing her face. "I'll pay you back," Weston said, hating himself a little. "Don't worry about it," she said, standing and gathering her coat. "You can get the next one." Driving home that night to a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and his daughter asleep in a room bigger than most studio apartments, Weston told himself he should feel triumphant. Piper had passed another test. So why did his stomach feel like a stone had settled in it? Their third date happened during a light snowstorm because Weston's car had supposedly broken down. Another lie layered onto the pile, his actual car sitting untouched in a private garage while he drove a battered old truck he'd bought specifically for this charade. "I don't mind walking," Piper said when he apologized for the third time, snow catching in her eyelashes. "I walk everywhere anyway. Gas is expensive and the bus system here is actually decent." They walked for almost 2 hours as the streetlights flickered on one by one, and Piper told him about her parents, how her mother used to hum while she cooked dinner, how her father read Sadie bedtime stories using a different voice for every character. "I try to do the voices like he did," Piper admitted. "I'm terrible at it, honestly." Sadie laughs anyway, which I think is mostly pity. Weston found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone, how Wren had nightmares after the divorce, how she'd once asked if her mother left because she didn't love her anymore, how guilt ate at him every time he worked late or missed a school event. "You're not failing her," Piper said firmly. They'd stopped walking under a street lamp on an empty corner, their breath fogging in the cold air. "Wren is loved. That's what actually matters. Trust me, as someone raising a kid myself, it isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up. You show up for Sadie every day, and you show up for Wren." Something shifted in that quiet moment, and Weston felt the careful walls he'd spent 2 years building start to give way, which terrified him more than anything had in a long time. This was supposed to prove that people were predictable, that everyone eventually broke, that his ex-wife had been right about human nature all along. But Piper kept refusing to break. Their fourth date was coffee in the same park. Their fifth was a free outdoor concert where Piper fell asleep on his shoulder halfway through, and Weston sat motionless for nearly an hour, terrified of waking her, thinking about how a person could work 70 hours a week and still not remember her last full night of sleep. By their sixth date, Weston knew he was in real trouble. They were walking through a holiday market downtown, past stalls selling mulled cider and handmade ornaments, and Wren had begged to come along, asking about Daddy's friend for weeks until Weston finally agreed after clearing it with Piper first. Watching Wren and Piper together made his throat tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Piper didn't talk down to her or use that strange sing-song voice adults reach for around children. She just talked to Wren like a person, asking about her favorite planets and listening seriously to an 8-year-old's rambling theory on black holes. "Can Piper come to my winter concert at school?" Wren asked, tugging his sleeve while they shared a paper cup of cider. Please, Daddy. She said she likes music. Weston looked at Piper, half expecting an excuse. Instead, she smiled. When is it? She asked. Next Thursday at 7. I work until 6, but I can make it happen, she said, catching Weston's eye. If that's all right with you. It wasn't all right. Not really, because Weston was falling for a woman he was actively lying to. And every day the lie grew heavier and harder to carry without cracking under its own weight. That night, after dropping Wren at Ashley's house and driving home alone through streets dusted white, Weston stood in his living room and looked at the life he had built. Furniture that cost more than most people earned in a year, art on the walls worth a small fortune, a view of the city stretched out like something he had conquered rather than lived in. None of it meant anything standing there. He thought about Piper in her small apartment with the mended sweater and the careful tip money saved for her sister's tablet. He thought about how easily she'd covered the bill, how she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder because she trusted him completely, how she talked to Wren like she genuinely mattered. He pulled out his phone and stared at his assistant's contact for a long time. One phone call, and he could have a full background check on Piper within hours, could confirm every detail of her story, could turn this into a fact rather than a feeling. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then he set the phone down. Because if he checked, if he verified her like she was a line item, then he was no better than the people who had taught him love was just another transaction to be negotiated. Piper arrived at Wren's winter concert wearing the same blue dress from their second date, clearly having come straight from her shift, her hair still pinned up, and she brought Sadie along in her wheelchair, bundled in a heavy coat. Weston's chest tightened when he saw them settle into the row behind him. Sadie was here. Piper had brought the person she sacrificed everything for to meet Weston's daughter, which meant she was letting him into the real, unguarded parts of her life. Afterward, Wren insisted everyone get hot chocolate, and Weston did quick math in his head, wondering if forgetting his wallet again would be pushing his luck too far. My treat, Piper said before he could even reach for his jacket. Wren was incredible tonight. We're celebrating. You don't have to, he started, but she was already wheeling Sadie toward the little cafe on the corner, holding Wren's mittened hand with her other one. Besides, I got a raise this week, she said over her shoulder, 25 cents an hour, but it's something. They crowded around a small table outside the cafe, the string lights glowing warm against the early dark. Wren and Sadie argued cheerfully about which planet had the best rings, while Ashley, who had come to collect Wren, stood off to the side, checking her phone with barely hidden impatience. She's really wonderful with kids, Ashley murmured to Weston, nodding toward Piper. Where did you find her? A diner, Weston said. She's good for Wren. I can tell, Ashley said, before gathering her purse and calling Wren over. After Ashley left with Wren, it was just Weston, Piper, and Sadie, the night turning colder around them. Piper shivered slightly in her thin coat, and Weston draped his jacket over her shoulders without thinking twice. You two are cute. It's disgusting, Sadie said from her chair, grinning. Sadie, Piper's face went pink. What? It's true, Sadie said, wheeling herself a few feet toward a bookstore window to give them space. You make my sister smile. She doesn't smile enough. So thanks, I guess. Whatever had been loosening in Weston for weeks gave way completely then, not the slow give from before, but something whole coming undone, and there was no putting it back the way it had been. Thank you for tonight, Piper said once Sadie had gone, for including her. Most guys I dated, back when I had time to date, didn't want anything to do with a sister in a wheelchair. Most guys are idiots, Weston said. Yeah, she agreed, stepping closer, close enough that he could smell the cheap drugstore shampoo in her hair. You're not like most guys, are you? Weston thought about the penthouse, the company, the bank account, the elaborate lie holding the whole structure together. No, he said evenly. I'm really not. Piper kissed him then, soft and searching, and Weston kissed her back, tasting hot chocolate and knowing with absolute certainty that he was about to destroy the best thing that had happened to him in years, because he could no longer keep lying to her. Not now. Not after this. Driving home that night through snow that had started falling harder, Weston made a decision. Tomorrow he would tell Piper everything, confess, apologize, and accept whatever came after, even if it meant losing her. Especially if it meant losing her, because that was what you did when you actually loved someone. You told the truth even when it cost you everything you'd built. He didn't sleep. He sat in his home office rehearsing the words until every version sounded worse than the last. By morning, he had drafted and deleted a dozen messages asking her to meet him. Finally, he just called. "Hey," Piper answered, sounding tired. "Everything okay? You never call this early." "Can we meet today?" he asked. "It's important." A pause stretched on the line. "Weston, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "I just need to talk to you, please," he said. "Okay," she said finally. "The park around 2. "Thank you," he said. And after he hung up, he sat in the quiet of his penthouse wondering if this would be the last time she ever agreed to see him. At 1:30, Weston was already on their bench, having changed clothes twice before settling on the same worn coat he always wore around her, which felt wrong now, like a costume he couldn't wait to shed. Piper arrived exactly at 2, coming straight from a morning shift, hair falling loose from its clip, that same exhausted look he'd learned to recognize. But she smiled when she saw him, that real smile that made him feel like the worst person alive. "Okay, you've got me worried," she said, sitting down. "What's so important?" "I haven't been honest with you," Weston said, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "What do you mean?" Her smile already fading. "I mean, I'm not who you think I am," he said. "I don't work in tech support. I own a technology company, a very successful one. I don't live in a small apartment. I have a penthouse downtown. My car never broke down, and I never forgot my wallet. And I'm not struggling financially. I never have been." Piper stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand," she said. "I have $43 million. Piper," he said. "I have had it this whole time. Everything I told you about money was a lie." The silence between them stretched out like something breaking slowly. "Why?" Her voice came out small. "Why would you lie about that?" "Because I wanted to know if someone could love me for who I am and not what I have," Weston said, the words tumbling faster now. "My ex-wife cheated on me with my business partner. She left for someone with more money and more connections, and it taught me that people only stay for what you can give them. So I started testing women, pretending to be broke, waiting to see who would stay anyway." "Testing?" Piper repeated the word like it belonged to a language she didn't speak. "You were testing me." "At first, yes," he admitted. "But then it stopped being a test. You became real to me, and I didn't know how to stop lying without losing you." Piper stood abruptly. "I need to think," she said. "Please," Weston started. "No." She held up a hand, and he saw it shaking. "You let me pay for dinner with money I needed for Sadie's therapy. You watched me worry about affording gas, about taking an afternoon off work, and the whole time you were what? Taking notes, seeing if the poor girl would pass your little experiment." "It wasn't like that," he said. "Then what was it like?" Her voice cracked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you played games with someone who never had the luxury of playing games back." "I know I messed up," Weston said, panic rising in his chest, "but everything else was real. The way I feel about you, the way I feel about Sadie, every conversation we had. How am I supposed to know what's real?" Piper wrapped her arms around herself. "You lied about everything. For all I know, you lied about caring too. I don't know if I can believe you," she said, tears filling her eyes, and Weston had never hated himself more. "I thought you understood what it was like to struggle, to worry about every dollar, to feel like you were barely keeping your head above water, but you were just visiting. You were a tourist in my life." "That's not fair," he said. "Fair?" Piper laughed without any humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? I work 70 hours a week to keep my sister alive. I haven't bought myself anything new in 2 years. I ate cereal for dinner last week because I had to choose between feeding myself and her therapy, and you were playing dress up in secondhand clothes, watching me like some kind of experiment." "I need to go," she said, already walking away fast. "Don't call me." 3 days passed in silence. Weston called twice and Piper didn't answer. He showed up at the diner, but her manager said she'd called in sick. Ren noticed almost immediately. "Where's Piper? Is she coming to see us this weekend?" she asked. "I don't think so, sweetheart," Weston said. "Why not?" "Did you have a fight?" Ren asked, tilting her head with the unnerving clarity children sometimes have. "Something like that," he admitted. "Did you say sorry?" she asked. "I tried," he said. "Try harder, Daddy. That's what you always tell me to do." On the 4th day, his assistant knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a Piper Lindqvist here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but says it's personal." Weston's heart stopped. "Send her in," he said. Piper walked in and took in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive furniture, The city spread out below like a kingdom, and she looked small standing there in her diner uniform surrounded by everything he'd hidden from her. "So this is your real life," she said, her voice flat. "Yes," he said. "It's nice," she said, walking to the window. "I've never been this high up before. You can see everything from here." "I've been angry at you for 4 days," Piper continued, still looking out at the skyline, really angry. "I told Sadie what happened, and she said you were a jerk who didn't deserve me." "She's probably right," Weston said. "She is right," Piper said, turning to face him, "but then I kept thinking about something. You told me the truth. You didn't have to. You could have kept lying forever, and I never would have known. But you told me anyway, even though you knew I'd be furious, even though you knew it might end everything." "I couldn't keep lying to someone I love," Weston said quietly. Her eyes filled again, but this time something in her face had softened. "I don't know if I can trust you completely yet," she admitted, "but I want to try, because the truth is I fell for you too. The real version underneath all the lies. The guy who listens when I talk about Sadie. The guy who makes Ren laugh until she snorts. The guy who kisses me like I'm the only person in the world." Weston crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled her into his arms, and she let him, burying her face against his chest, the traffic below humming on, unaware of anything that had just changed above it. For a while it seemed like the worst had already happened and passed. Weston set up a trust for Sadie's ongoing care, not because Piper asked, she hadn't, but because it felt like the only decent thing to do. Piper cut back her hours at the grocery store, kept the diner shifts she genuinely loved, and started sleeping through most nights for the first time in years. Then, 3 weeks later, everything came apart again in a way neither of them had prepared for, and it started with a woman neither of them had thought about in months. One of the 19 women Weston had tested before Piper, a woman named Bridget who had ghosted him after date 2, spotted him at a tech industry gala in a photograph tagged online, dressed in a suit that cost more than her rent, nothing like the man in the thrift store coat, she remembered. She still had an old phone picture from their date, him fumbling with his declined card, and she sold it along with her story to a local blog for $800. The piece ran under the headline "The Secret Life of Weston Hale," painting him as a manipulative millionaire who lured a struggling waitress into an elaborate psychological game for entertainment. And within 2 days, a regional news station had picked it up. Ashley called that same evening, her voice sharp with something that wasn't quite concern. "I saw the article," Ashley said when Weston answered. "Everyone saw the article, Weston. Ren's classmates are talking about it. I need you to know I'm filing for a modification of custody, full custody, effective immediately." Weston felt the floor tilt under him. "Ashley, that's insane," he said. "This has nothing to do with Ren." "It has everything to do with Ren," Ashley snapped. "You spent over a year lying to women as some kind of experiment, and now it's a headline my daughter's friend's parents are reading at breakfast. I'm not going to let her grow up in the middle of that instability." The hearing was set for 3 weeks out, and Weston sat across a conference table from his own lawyer feeling more exposed than he ever had in a boardroom. "This isn't really about Ren's safety, is it?" his lawyer said carefully, reviewing the filing. "It's about leverage and reputation." Weston didn't answer because he knew the harder truth, that Ashley's fear wasn't entirely manufactured. He had spent over a year building an elaborate deception, and now that deception had a photograph and a headline attached to it, and he understood, cold and clear, why a judge might look at that pattern and worry. Piper found out from Sadie, who had seen the article shared everywhere online before Weston even had the chance to tell her himself. She showed up at his office that evening, still in her uniform, phone in hand. "Is this true?" she asked. "Is she really trying to take Ren from you because of what happened between us?" "It's not because of you," Weston said. "It's because of what I did, and I understand why she's scared, even if I hate it." Piper sat down slowly across from his desk, quiet for a long moment. "Then let me help," she said. "I'll go to the hearing. I'll tell the truth about who you actually are with your daughter, because a headline isn't the same thing as a person." Weston shook his head. "You don't have to put yourself through that," he said. "The press will tear you apart too if you show up." "I know," Piper said, "and I'm doing it anyway, because you showed up for Sadie without being asked to, and now it's my turn." The hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning with snow beginning to fall outside the courthouse windows. Ashley's attorney walked the judge through the blog post, the photographs, months of what he called calculated emotional manipulation, painting Weston as a man who treated relationships like laboratory experiments and might do the same with parenting decisions. When it was her turn, Piper stood without any notes, and for a second she just stood there, hands gripping the edge of the podium like she wasn't sure where to start. "I met Weston Hale thinking he was broke," she finally said. "He left good tips, and he remembered my sister's name, which honestly is more than most people manage. Then I found out he had $43 million and had been lying to me the whole time, and I was furious. I'm still a little furious if I'm being honest." She paused, glancing down before looking back up. "But I've watched him pick his daughter up from school every day he has her. I've watched him sit through an entire school play about the solar system without checking his phone once. He set up a fund for my sister's care and never once brought it up again, like it wasn't even worth mentioning. Whatever test he was running on strangers, it never touched how he shows up for the people he actually loves. I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. I'd have no reason to." The judge denied the emergency modification, ruling that a media narrative wasn't sufficient grounds to disrupt an otherwise stable custody arrangement, though she noted, pointedly, that Weston's judgment outside the courtroom left something to be desired. Outside on the courthouse steps, snow gathering on their shoulders, Ashley approached Weston alone while Piper waited a respectful distance away. "That was hard to sit through," Ashley said, arms crossed against the cold. "Harder than it needed to be," Weston said. "Ashley, I never lied to Ren, only to the women I dated." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Ashley asked, an edge still in her voice. "No," Weston admitted. "I know what this looked like from where you're standing." Ashley was quiet for a moment, watching a car pull away from the curb. "I filed because I saw my daughter's name in a comment section under an article calling her father a con man," she said finally. "I panicked. I didn't think it through past that." "That's fair," Weston said. "I gave you the ammunition." Ashley looked at him, some of the hardness going out of her face. "I'm not going to pretend we're friends now," she said. "We're not," Weston agreed. "But we're still her parents. That part doesn't change." Ashley nodded once, sharp and businesslike, but something in the set of her shoulders had eased by the time she turned to walk back to her car. That night, Piper stood at the edge of Weston's kitchen while he made tea, the city lights spread out quiet and distant beyond the windows. "I need to say something," she said, and he set the kettle down and gave her his full attention. "I keep waiting for the part where all of this becomes too much," she admitted. "The money, the cameras, the custody hearings, none of it is anything I ever trained for. And some nights I wonder if I'm just going to wake up back at the diner wondering if any of this was real." Weston stood very still. "Are you asking me to prove something?" he asked gently. "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "I think I'm asking myself whether I'm brave enough to stay for something this big, after spending my whole life just trying to survive something small." He didn't reach for her, didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurance, because he understood this hesitation belonged entirely to her, and it deserved room to breathe. "I'm not going anywhere," he finally said, "but I'm not going to talk you into staying either. That has to be your choice, made with clear eyes, not mine made for you." Piper looked at him for a long moment, snow ticking softly against the glass behind her, and something in her posture eased, like she'd been carrying a question and had just set it down. "Ask me again in the spring," she said finally, "and if I still feel the same way, then you'll have your answer, and it won't be because you convinced me of anything." "Fair enough," Weston said, and meant it completely, even though it cost him something to say. Winter passed slowly after that, in ordinary ways that felt anything but ordinary to either of them. Piper kept her diner shifts and started taking 2 night classes toward a nursing degree she'd shelved years earlier. Sadie got a lighter wheelchair, better insurance, and, eventually, a service dog named Buttons that made her laugh more than anything else in months. Ren drew her family constellation and included Piper and Sadie as 2 new stars without anyone asking her to. In early April, the last hard frost of the season settled over Denver overnight, dusting the diner's windows white one final time before spring arrived for good. Weston found Piper there on her lunch break, sitting in their usual corner booth, and slid in across from her without a word. "You said ask you again in the spring," he said. "Technically it's still frost outside," she said, glancing toward the window, "but close enough." She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers still faintly rough from years of dishwater and cold mornings. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because of the money, not because of the penthouse, but because you told me the hardest truth of your life sitting on a bench in the snow, and then you kept telling me hard truths every day after that. That's rarer than any of it. 6 months later, Weston stood in his kitchen making pancakes while Wren and Sadie argued cheerfully over which planet had the better moons. Buttons curled at Sadie's feet. Piper sat at the counter in scrubs from her first nursing rotation, reading over notes with the quiet focus of someone finally allowed to want something just for herself. Weston had learned to stop trying to buy his way out of every hard moment, and Piper had learned to stop bracing for the ground to disappear beneath her. And somewhere between those two adjustments, without either of them quite planning it, they had built something neither of their old lives had room for. Outside, the first true snow of the new season began to fall, and Wren pressed her palm to the cold window glass, leaving a small clear circle in the frost. "It's snowing, Daddy," she announced, like it was news worth interrupting breakfast for. "It is," Weston agreed, catching Piper's eye across the kitchen. Some people never learn to trust the snow, thinking it only ever means the roads will be difficult and the mornings will be harder. But every so often it falls soft and quiet over a place that needed exactly that kind of covering, settling gently over everything broken until, underneath, something new has enough room to grow. If this story found its way to you tonight, we would love to know what you think in the comments below. Do you believe Weston was right to test the people he dated, or did he cross a line he never should have crossed? And if someone you loved admitted they had been testing you the whole time, could you find it in yourself to forgive them? Let us know your honest answer down below. And if this story kept you here until the very end, do us a small favor, hit subscribe to Wintervale so the next story finds you when the next snow falls. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.